Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our program, Down and Dirty, Social Media, When the Novelty Wears Off. I'm Jamie Monchik with the Nicolet Federated Library System. I wanted to just say I'm in Green Bay, but I'm actually not. I'm at the Wapaka Public Library, broadcasting live in Wapaka. I have a meeting today about 20 minutes from here, and it was just easier for me to do the webinar here so I could get to my meeting more quickly. And that's the beautiful thing about webinars. As long as I have a reliable internet access and the speaker has internet access, we can do this from anywhere in the world, which is pretty cool. So our speaker, Laura Solomon, is coming to us near Cleveland, Ohio today. And some of you might recognize her name. She's done a lot of webinars for us in the past, and they've always been fabulous. Laura works for the Ohio Public Library Information Network, or OPLIN, and she is a former mover and shaker. She's written a couple books. She's done a lot of trainings and presentations on marketing and social media. And I thought this would be a good time to kind of get a sense of where are we at with social media. You know, Facebook changes quite a bit. We're hearing a lot that we need to be purchasing ads to get our reach, you know, shown on our pages. You know, Twitter has stayed the same pretty consistently. MySpace is pretty much not being used unless you're in the music industry. And then there's Snapchat, and there's still Pinterest and Instagram and some of those things. So where are we at with those? Laura's going to talk about some of those things today, and she's watching the chat box, and I know she wanted you to bring questions, so feel free to type in questions as you have them. She'll be watching that. If you don't have any, I'm sure I will, so I hope you do. So Laura, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. Like Jamie said, I love questions, and actually I love to interrupt myself. If you've ever heard me speak before, I love to chat with people sort of in context. So if you have questions, please don't feel like you have to leave them until the very end. Also, if you have commentary about what I'm talking about, please put that into the chat as well, because my experience with these kinds of webinars where there is public chat is that often your colleagues are really good sources for all sorts of things, and sharing their own experiences sometimes is validation for what we're doing. And sarcastic comments are okay too. And Jamie's going to help out. I'll take just about anything except virtual tomatoes. Keep those in check. But today we're going to be talking about a bunch of different things. But before we get started, if you would just put into the chat, just answer yes or no to this question. I do the social media for my library. Yes or no? Just type that into the public chat if you would, please. I just want to get a sense of how many of you are doing this sort of professionally, I guess. Jamie says yes with an exclamation point. Megan says no, and it's okay if you don't. There's no discrimination here. Sometimes doing it for ourselves or even other organizations, all of this is going to be applicable, so don't worry. So we've got yes, we've got a no. Come on, keep typing, folks. I'm looking at the chat. Just type yes or no. Do you do this for your library? And Jamie, can they find the chat box quickly? It should be on the right-hand side of their screen, I'm guessing.
They can't see each other's responses. That's the one unfortunate thing about GoToWebinar. So yeah, okay. So you kind of have to. That's why I relay what people say. Yeah.
Gotcha. I missed that part of this, so my apologies, folks. Okay, I'll read them as they come in if Jamie doesn't catch them. But even if you don't do social media for your library, chances are good you've spent probably a lot of time with social media. I'm going to assume that you're not newbies. If you are a complete newbie or a fairly new newbie, if there is such a thing as a new newbie, then this may not be what you're looking for. To be honest, this is kind of the support group for those of us who spend way too much time with this stuff. I have made no secret of the fact over the past several years that I now have really a love-hate relationship with social media, and maybe some of you feel the same. It's like, yay, it's time to do Facebook, and it's like, oh God, it's time to do Facebook. It really just, sometimes I wish I could just go hibernate in the woods and never see Facebook or its ilk ever again. And maybe you feel the same way. So here's what we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to talk about this phenomenon for those of us who have really been working in the quagmire for a long time. And Jamie says, Facebook is a major time suck for me. Oh my gosh. You know, that's part of the reason I think that I at least have that love-hate relationship, is that I spend too much time with it and it just sucks away your life. Kind of like if you've ever seen The Princess Bride and Carrie Elwes is attached to that machine in the dungeon and all of his life is being sucked away. I think that machine really is Facebook in disguise. Of course, the movie predates that, but that's my feeling about it. But so today we're going to talk about when the love is gone, what happens. We're also going to talk about planning ahead, because sometimes that can be really a difficult part of our job. We're also going to talk about one of the things we don't like to talk about, that not everybody in social media plays nice. And that's just one of the unfortunate pieces of this, so we're going to cover that. And then another thing that you'll probably not see discussed very much at all, which is pulling the plug entirely on a social channel, when you know to do that. And Jamie says, I try to schedule, or Susan says, I try to schedule posts so I don't have to do it so often. Yeah, we're going to talk about doing that and some good ways to do that, and you'd be surprised. Okay, so, and then lastly, of course, we'll do some big takeaways, things that you need to remember. And also, if you're shy, you can save your questions until the end, but like I said, I absolutely love to take the questions in midstream. I'm okay with that. So what happens when the love is gone? Go ahead and put in the chat if you still love to do social media work or not. And you can add any commentary you'd like to that, and we'll share that out. Jamie will. Just while I'm talking, do you still love to spend time in social media and doing this work for your library especially? For you personally, whether you hate it or love it, that's okay. But what happens? Well, I think for many of us, when we started out in social media, this was kind of the environment, wasn't it? It was all rainbows and unicorns and lollipops, and yay, this is so exciting, and now we can talk to our patrons. And then we suddenly came to realize that maybe it's not as much fun as we thought it was going to be, or as much fun as it was. The novelty does wear off, particularly when it's something that you have to do. And I think that's another piece of at least my love-hate relationship. And it's just a lot to keep up with. Jamie mentioned, and Mariel said, it's hard to keep up with it, and I feel like I'm attached to work 24/7. I agree with that 100%, and I think that for many community managers and social media managers, they feel the same way, is that it's the same stuff over and over. As Amy said, it can get repetitive. It can. It's not as much fun. Now, you may think this is just a whole hour of Laura ragging on social media, and it's not. But I just want you to understand that there is a burnout factor involved in social media. And yes, there is. Sandy says, not as much as I used to. But we can't do this, right? This isn't an option for us. For those of us who do this as part of our job, we're stuck with it. As much as we might not want to be, social media is no longer a fad, is it? It is now very much part of communications, part of professional communications. And we're not going to get away from that no matter how many fingers we stick in our ears. And Susan says, I'm not liking it at all. I wish I could delegate this. And some places have the luxury of a team of people to do this, but for most of us, we don't have that. And of course, social media is, like I said, is very huge now. Those of us who spend a lot of time with it know it. So let's just review some of these facts because we want to be even more depressed, right? So here is a chart. This is from Search Engine Journal. This is actually from last year. I don't think they've put out this year's version yet. So the numbers are going to be even bigger this year, of course, because these charts tend to do nothing but go upwards. But if you take a look at this chart, what's interesting to me about this is, of course, it's tracking how many people are using different channels, and that's always good information. But what's interesting in particular to me about this chart is that it's tracking active users. Now, this is not people who have just signed up for social media. This is people who have signed up and stuck with it. These are the people who are still doing Snapchat and Facebook and Pinterest and LinkedIn and whatever. And you can see we're looking at, probably by now, it's more than 2 billion active users in social media. That's immense. So anyone who still says this is a fad needs to do a little research. So we're stuck with this, aren't we? And the numbers, honestly, are not in our favor if we want this to go away. Facebook, of course, this is pretty much the king of most channels for most of us. People spend 40 minutes a day on average just on Facebook. And some of you said this was a total time suck. I agree, it is. I'm always a little hesitant to kind of dive into it and open that up in one of my tabs because who knows when I'm going to get out of it. An average of 40 minutes a day just on this one channel on Facebook. Then there's Pinterest. Pinterest is sort of a newer player in the game, but it's taken off quite a bit. Out of the U.S. online adult women, 42%. Now, I have mixed feelings. This is sort of a different piece of information. I have mixed feelings about Pinterest for libraries, but personally, I spend way too much time on Pinterest. This is like my guilty pleasure. And that's no surprise considering 42% of adult women in our country use it. Only 13% of men. So if you're thinking about targeting certain demographics by gender, then obviously this is the place to go if you're mostly looking at women. Then we've got YouTube. Boy, talk about another time suck. This is pretty scary. And of course now we just got a new TV, and our TV comes with this built-in. You can now use YouTube. Maybe I'm the last person on the planet to get this feature, but I was shocked, like, oh my gosh, YouTube is basically TV now. And we spend an immense amount of time on it, and perhaps even more interestingly, 400 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube every minute. Every minute. You can't possibly watch everything on YouTube in many of your lifetimes. Old episodes of sitcoms. Yeah, you can find just about anything on YouTube, for better and for worse. And then we have newer channels, right? Now we've got things like live streaming. And this, by the way, I'm not even looking at Facebook Live or YouTube Live, which is out there, and a lot of people don't even realize that. But this is Periscope, which is owned by Twitter, and it's probably one of the first live streaming apps. 40 years, this is still 40 years per day of stuff is streamed through Periscope. That's even more than I think YouTube. It's just kind of mind-boggling. And for those of us who are already overwhelmed, these kinds of numbers really don't help, right? I'm not being very helpful today, so I apologize. But it is not bad. I think that for some of us in libraries, sometimes we still have to kind of contend with this. I hope that none of you do, but it's been my experience in talking to others that I've worked with in various capacities and who are in other libraries, that there's still sort of the sense of like, oh, you know, it's kind of this other, yeah, if you've got a little time, we do some social media. It's far, far beyond that. It's not going away. And the amount of growth on some networks like Facebook, it is starting to slow down a little. I mean, eventually you run out of people, so it's going to plateau a little. But, you know, that's because things like Facebook are already incredibly huge. And so there's not as much room for growth. But it's still definitely not a fad. So this tends to be our current state for many of us working in social media on a regular basis, whether it's your full-time job or your part-time job because you wear other hats in your libraries. But we kind of look at our computer screens, and I personally have wanted to tear my hair out fairly often because we're caught in this dreary dichotomy, aren't we, of not having fun anymore and still having to do this work and do it well. And we get overwhelmed with the sheer amount of information and not necessarily knowing how to streamline our work. And there are all kinds of other issues, of course, right? Ones that may involve other library staff or not knowing what to post. And sometimes we've got more questions than answers, and we just get overwhelmed. If it's any consolation, you are not alone, and this is not unique to libraries. This is a problem that every social media manager in every industry is facing. So I can't keep you I can't put the rainbows and unicorns back into your social media management. That's far beyond me, sadly. I would if I could. But I can help you get some supports in place to make things perhaps a little easier so you're not drowning. And so one of the most important of these we're going to talk about next, and that is planning ahead in a strategic way. So planning ahead. How many of you do plan ahead? If you would just type yes or no, I would really like to get a sense. I know that you can't see each other's answers, but I really would like to kind of get a sense of how many of you are already doing some kind of planning ahead with your social media work. I'm going to keep going, but I'm going to keep one eye on the chat to see what Jamie's posting for me in terms of yes, no. Oh, she's already collating it. Great. Some yes, some no. Okay, so we've got quite a mix in there, which is pretty much what I expected, and that's okay. Even if you're already doing some planning, I'm hoping I'm going to give you some more thoughts about how to do it better. So when many of us, and especially our libraries, kind of got started working in social media or got a social media channel for some kind, this is kind of how it got done. And for many of you, this may still be how it gets done. It's guesswork. We don't really have a plan or any kind of strategy. And there are a lot of days, and I have done this in the past, so don't feel bad because I'm just as guilty as all of you, where we just kind of go, okay, what do I post on Pinterest today? What do I post on Facebook today? We're just kind of throwing things at the virtual wall and seeing what sticks. But then what happens? We discover that our results on social media are, at best they're sporadic. They're not very good. Sometimes nothing happens. And I saw someone mention earlier about, something gets 50 engagements, another gets 5,000. Yeah. For many of us, we post only when we have the time, whatever that means, and we start to wonder why we're doing this stuff at all. And this is not a methodology. And one thing that you have to consider, and I talk a lot more about this actually in my latest book, which is about content marketing, there's a concept out there called content shock. It was coined by Mark W. Schaefer. He wrote a great book. It came out last year. It's called Content Code. And basically what content shock says is that by the year 2020, there's going to be an immense increase, over 500%, in the amount of content that's available. So what does that mean? We can't consume any more content than we already have. So people are we're already in shock from what we have. Imagine it being 5 times worse in less than 5 years. That's content shock. So just kind of throwing things at that virtual wall or guessing isn't going to cut it anymore. We can't use that as a methodology because our stuff isn't going to be seen. And for those of you who are not planning ahead in any real strategic way, this becomes a problem because you do end up with a sort of sporadic response rate, much more so perhaps than the norm, or no engagement of any kind at all. So this needs to be your new best friend forever. And this is a content calendar or an editorial content planning calendar. There are lots of names for it. Now, most of us are familiar with the idea of a traditional editorial calendar. They've been around forever, probably in print. They help visualize content publishing on some kind of content-like interface. And essentially, if you've ever looked at like a magazine calendar, it might say, okay, this month we're going to, our theme is going to be gardens, and next month our theme is going to be organizing, or, of course it depends on the kind of magazine. But they have something where they're planning ahead what they're going to be posting. That idea has made its way over to social media. But it is a little different. In fact, it's probably a lot different in an important way from a traditional editorial calendar. It's not just a matter of saying, okay, this is when we're going to post and what we're going to post. But content marketing and social media marketing is very strategic. You have to understand your audience and what motivates them and what they need to hear from you in order to make a connection to your library. This kind of goes back to the idea of guesswork. We can't do this anymore. We need to know who we're talking to and what they're looking for. And so a content marketing editorial calendar is essentially a planning document that gives you and your team, if you're lucky enough to have a team, maybe you are the team, like I am the team where I am, but it gives you a plan of attack. So why bother, you think? Because this is just it's going to be more work. I'm not going to pretend that it's not, and if you look like that social media marketer pulling her hair out, the last thing you probably want is more work. But this is a matter of putting the work in up front to save yourself work later. First of all, this is a great way to get ideas. Sometimes, at least for me, one of the best things I can do is to look at a blank piece of paper and try to fill it in. It gives me a very concrete way to do that and say, okay, and also if you've got themes, I'm going to show you a sample of that a little later, that makes it easier also, but it can be a great way to generate ideas. You can also, someone was mentioning they wish they could delegate, and of course not all of us have that ability or that luxury to delegate to other people, but if you do, or even if you don't have a specific team so much as maybe just people in different departments assigned to give you content, this allows you to assign those tasks and to see that very clearly. It also allows you to target and to be consistent. How many of you are like me, where you just, or at least how I used to be before I discovered the editorial calendar process, where you're kind of like, okay, I have time today, but then you don't post for a couple of days because you don't have time. A calendar enables you to be consistent because it says, okay, this is the day we're going to post this thing, and tomorrow's the day we're going to post this thing. And a lot of products now and channels and third-party add-ons, all kinds of things, allow you to schedule in advance. It's built into some things like Facebook, for example. You can schedule things. So this enables you to really take advantage of those kinds of features. Probably the thing, though, that I think argues the most strongly for having an editorial calendar for social media is the broad overview that it gives you. It gives you a really nice bird's eye view of everything that's coming up, and you can strategize around that. If you're particularly doing social media around events at your library, this calendar view can be invaluable. And even if you're not, it does give you that nice bird's eye view. So you can say, okay, we already did that last month. I can look back at my calendar and say, you know what, we just did that. We're not going to do that again. So you can still keep your sense of consistency without duplication. So it gives you overall a really great framework for the social media work that your library does. This is an example, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different templates for social media and content marketing editorial calendars. This is just one from Pam the Marketing Nut, and I liked hers for a couple different reasons. First, it is by theme, which I sometimes find a little easier to do. However, you are welcome to take this template or any other template that you find and make your own, whatever works for you, as long as you have one. This one does it for a month approximately. I'm not getting quite the whole shot in there. But one of also the interesting things that this particular template does is you'll notice it focuses on the audience. There is no content in your library or in your content marketing that is for absolutely everyone. This is a mistake that rookies make, is they think that everybody needs to see everything, and that's not how it works. That's not how advertising out in the rest of the world works, or promotion or anything. If you are promoting stuff, it has an audience. In this case, the particular form you're looking at, it has a primary audience, a secondary audience. It's even going as far as a tertiary audience. I don't know if you need to go that far, but if you need that, go for it. You want to at least know who that content is for, and it's never going to be for everyone. Not everyone is the audience for all of your content. Another method that you can use, and this is because I am not a team, because I am a one-person show here, this is actually the method that I use, which is simply Google Calendar. Like I said, anything that works for you is great. Because nobody else has to see this but me, I just put in notes. I can add attachments, which I like. I can send myself reminders. And the thing is, for me at least, I already use Google Calendar extensively. My whole life runs on Google Calendar. My whole family uses Google Calendar. My workplace runs on different Google Calendars. So this integrates very nicely into everything else that I do, rather than yet another format. For me, this is just another thing that appears with all my other calendars. However, Do what works for you. If you don't use Google Calendar or doing this digitally doesn't work for you, if you want to do it on paper, if you'd rather do it in Word, like I said, it's not the format that matters so much. It's the fact that you use one and you get that bird's eye view and you can be strategic about what you're posting and when. But whatever your format is, you need to follow 2 rules. There are only 2. That's one of the nice things. There's only 2 rules here, and here they are. The first one is you should have only one content marketing calendar. That's it. If you have a different calendar for your blog and a different calendar for Pinterest and a different calendar for Instagram and a different calendar for the reference department and a different calendar for this and the other thing, you have failed Content Marketing Editorial Calendar 101, because you need to have that bird's eye view. You're going to hear me talk about that a lot when you hear me talk about this stuff, because it's one of the most critical elements of that calendar. You need to have it all in one place so that you can see it and anyone else who's involved with your social media efforts can see it. The second rule is to include social sharing. Now you might think, but isn't that what this whole calendar is about? Not exactly. Let me show you an example. So when I say social sharing, this is actually a really good example. This is a company called CoSchedule, and they actually have a product that does this. You don't have to have a product to do this. Obviously, you could do this in any way that you choose. It's just they make it simple to do this kind of scheduling with their product. But one of the nice things that they have is a screenshot that really makes it clear what social scheduling means. You can see here, let's say this is for a blog post, okay? And this is the social sharing schedule for that blog post. You can see here when it's first published, it's published on Twitter, it's published on Facebook, and it's published on Google+. Now, you may not be on all these channels, or you may have different channels. It doesn't matter. Whatever you happen to have is what you should be scheduling. The idea is the same. And then you can see that it's posted again at different interims, or different intervals, posting, if you will, of the blog post. And for those of you who are going, well, why would you post it again? Every channel you should be repeating your content at some point. You've created that content. It's great content. You put time into it. Use it. Reuse it. Recycle it in some way. And particularly Twitter, a lot of folks don't think about this too carefully, but you'll notice here on their social sharing schedule, it actually illustrates the idea very well, is that with Twitter, you have to push things out over and over and over because people often don't see it because the stuff just streams by. I mean, I'm sure for those of you who are on Twitter, you understand why you need to do this, because the chances of someone actually catching it the first time are actually very low. So you need to push things out repeatedly. And then on these other channels, push it out at least 1, maybe even 2 more times at some point for those people who didn't catch it the first time, particularly if it's something where you're kind of building up to an event. You definitely want to be doing this. So this is social sharing. This is a little different than the regular calendar, but it's an add-in, even if it's just a note that you add to yourself, whatever works for you. Now, if you need templates, if you want a full template, here's one from CoSchedule. They have the social sharing schedule I just showed you a screenshot of. HubSpot is another large agency that does some great stuff, including an editorial calendar template. And then if you don't like either of those or you want even more ideas, here is a whole Pinterest board that somebody has put together of editorial content marketing calendars. Take one of these and make it work for you, but fill it out. This is a little more work up front. It will save you a lot of work down the road, and it will make what you're posting better. Okay, so let's move on to the next piece here. Not everybody plays nice. Whenever somebody says that and says, oh, not everybody's nice in social media, the first thing that comes to most people's mind is probably a troll. The reality, though, is that the vast majority of not nice people on social media, are, for better and for worse, are not trolls. We tend to be kind of scared of that whole troll idea. How many of you have actually dealt with a troll? I'll just hang on a second here to see if anything came in.
Laura, how would you define a troll? I'm just curious.
Okay, good point.
Because maybe I haven't, maybe I haven't.
Okay. No, actually, I was going to cover that a little later, but actually, you're right. This is probably a good point, sort of elucidate a little bit. A troll essentially is someone who is just looking for a reaction. I always think of a troll as a toddler. They want attention and they don't care what kind. They're not doing anything constructive. It's not a legitimate complaint. To me, a troll is someone who says, oh, who needs libraries? We have Google. That's someone who's looking for a reaction for the most part. You know, and okay, so Jamie says we've got at least one. Okay. Yes, no, yes. Okay. Good. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. A lot of us kind of operate, I think, out of fear when it comes to social media. And in fact, I know this kept a lot of libraries out of social media probably longer than they should have been because of sort of this fear of, oh my gosh, what if someone says something bad? Well, you know, this is not new, is it? People have always been mad at the library. Don't tell me that there are no patrons that you run to avoid when you see them come to the desk. Don't tell me, because I've been there. I know there have been patrons where we all kind of like, okay, it's your turn, and the rest of us ran to the back room. This is not a new principle. The thing, though, that makes it new and perhaps a little scarier for us, of course, is the fact that now we're dealing with some of these people in this more public arena, where as opposed to, you know, you might have been able to maybe take them to a conference room or just deal with them on the phone, and they certainly, you know, if they were limited to one building, now you potentially have the eyes of the entire world on you while you're dealing with this person or people. But the whole idea of not nice people is not new to us. And one concept I'd like you to consider is this quote from Jay Bauer. He's written some great stuff. He runs a marketing blog called Convince and Convert, and he's written at least a couple books that I highly recommend. But I think his point here is well taken. The ire you direct at the customer that dared to slam you in a blog comment is wholly misplaced. This is a hard concept for us, I think. The customers that take you to task in social media aren't the ones you need to worry about. It's the customers that don't care enough to even complain or have forgotten you entirely that are truly dangerous to your corporate well-being. This is a little different than we're used to thinking about in most cases, because I think many of us have been conditioned to think that everyone who says something bad is a troll, and that is not the case. I'm going to talk a little more about that in just a minute. So when we see something negative, our first response typically is a fight or flight response, right? But I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath. Certainly these people are not about to make our day. They're not. We look at these and go, oh, I mean, just like when the people start yelling at us because they have a 5-cent fine at the circulation desk. You know, these are not the people that we came to work in libraries thinking we were going to encounter, but they're there and we have to deal with them. But take a deep breath, because fight or flight is actually not what you should be doing first. You want to take that deep breath. Often I find it useful to walk away, sometimes for several minutes. You can't put it off too long, though. You do have to respond in a timely way. But the first thing we need to do is actually do some categorization. And Jamie was asking me to define a troll. So let me talk about some of these other things that you're going to encounter that are actually a lot more common. First, there's the straight problem. And this is easy to respond to. This is, for example, a patron has an issue with something that the library has done and details went wrong. Okay, so for example, I was in the library today and the circulation clerk was rude when I asked her for help. That's a straight problem. Nobody wants to read that. Nobody wants to deal with that. But we're accustomed to dealing with that kind of thing. It's part of what we do. Then there's number 2, constructive criticism, which is a lot like number 1, except that the patron includes a possible solution. It's more helpful and less hurtful. So it's really just a little bit of a change there. And number 3, we don't like because it gets a little closer to trolling, but it's still merited. It's an attack that actually is legitimate. What it means is that the library did something wrong and the patron is angry. So the comment may be very negative and it could be out of proportion. For example, a clerk was rude to me when I asked her for help today, and you should fire her. You know, and I'm going to go tell the mayor. And I mean, you know these people who just blow everything out of proportion. The fact that they blew it out of proportion doesn't negate the original issue, and it also does not make them a troll. So the main difference between a merited attack and trolling is that trolling has no real reason to make the comment or the attack. There's no rude circ clerk. There's nothing that's really making them angry. They're just trying to get reactions. The goal is to get a response, like a kid looking for negative attention. So we don't actually deal, most of us, with real live trolls very often, but we do deal with the other three in person as well as online. When we start dealing with these kinds of things, we have to ask ourselves some additional questions. First, is it consistent? So are we consistently getting complaints about the same circ person? Or is it one person who just complains all the time and is always looking for something wrong? Is it realistic? Can you actually fire that circ clerk? Probably not, especially over one kind of random Facebook comment, for example. The whole point of this is keeping it in perspective, because sometimes, and I know this is true for me and maybe it is for you, but sometimes it can feel very personal when we start reading this stuff, and it can kind of take us aback and go, but I thought everybody loved the library. Well, we know not everybody loves the library, right? When we start responding to these people, this is other than the trolls, one of the first things we need to do, besides taking that step back and kind of asking ourselves these questions, is we actually do need to respond in a timely way. Not responding in a timely way can get us into a lot of trouble. Actually, Amazon.com is one of the first companies to show pretty clearly what happens when you don't respond in a timely way. Some of you may remember this, and I've talked about it before, and it's because it was probably the first large-scale case where this happened. But in 2009, I believe it was, Amazon made an sort of arbitrary decision to categorize all of the LBGT books as erotica. And of course, if you're a librarian, if you were aware at the time, you were probably furious because you know that's not true. But they just decided to do that. They certainly didn't consult any librarians or anybody. They just decided to do this. Well, the internet kind of exploded, not just librarians. And Amazon did something that to this day is talked about, and not in a good way. They did nothing. For 24 hours, they did absolutely nothing. In internet time, that might as well have been years. Think about what happens, even just like in your library amongst the staff, when something goes unaddressed, even for 24 hours, let alone when you're dealing with millions of people. Oh, Jamie, that looks like a neat topic. I'm sorry I missed it. But we can't make everybody love us, but we have to respond in a timely manner. The longer people go without something from the responsible party, so to speak, the more likely they are to make things up, right? That's what happens in our libraries among the staff. If something's going awry and nobody steps forward to take charge of the situation, people start talking about it, the grapevine grows, and people start speculating. Well, imagine that on the scale of Amazon.com and the internet, and that's what happened. People got madder than they were originally because Amazon did nothing. We have to manage this in a timely way, or situations get worse. Even if it's to say something as simple as, we appreciate your feedback, and we're going to look into this. We apologize that this happened to you. Even that will diffuse the situation enough generally so that they're not going to go out and post it to the world immediately. Another important thing we have to do, and if you've ever had any kind of difficult patron kind of training or gone to webinars, you've probably learned this, and sometimes in the heat of the moment it's hard to do, and that is to use empathy. It's kind of like, I'm sorry you had that experience. I wouldn't like it either. I'm going to look into it. Empathy is one of our most important tools. Even if you don't have any sympathy for the situation, at least using some empathy is going to help diffuse that situation to some extent, and you'll find that works in person and online. Empathy is a really critical tool. And of course, taking responsibility. We all have heard of situations online where something went wrong or something happened and the company involved said, no, 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 it was somebody else's fault or it wasn't our problem. And that just makes things blow up. We have to own these problems, and at least at the beginning, we've got to say, okay, you know, we're sorry this happened. We've got some empathy there, and we're going to look into it. We've got to take some responsibility for that. And we have to watch our tone. This is hard. And I will be the first to tell you, it's a good thing I'm not a library director. I couldn't be. I think I would lose my mind at some point. But tone matters. You know that as well as I do, even if you don't have any sympathy. So let me show you an example of this in action, because I can talk about it all day. So here's a patron complaint. Let's say it's on Facebook, because Facebook's such a common channel that many of us use. So the patron comments on the library's Facebook wall, "Why can't I ever get on a computer?" And obviously they're irked because they've got lots of exclamation points. You know, we're amazed they didn't type it in all caps. How do we respond to this? Why can't I ever get on a computer? You've probably heard this at your desk if you're a library. Now here's one possible response to this. Most computers are on a first-come, first-served basis. Call this number to reserve one ahead of time. This is okay, but this is not going to diffuse your situation or specifically the anger of that person. They have a legitimate complaint. They can't get on a computer. They need one. It's not a merited attack, and it's certainly not constructive, but they're upset, and it's legitimate. So how do we deal with that? Technically, this addresses the problem, right? It's just saying why you couldn't get on one, and we'll give you the number, and you can reserve one ahead of time. The problem with this response, though, is that it doesn't do anything in the way of addressing the human element. There's nothing here to diffuse the anger. And where's the empathy component? That really is going to often do. Some people just want to be heard. Humans want to be acknowledged, and they want to be heard. And there's none of that in this response. This is a very formal response. It's just frankly going to make someone more peed off than they were. So here's something a little better. We know it can seem crazy. The computers get a lot of use. Here's that empathy element. Try giving Mary a call. Now we've given this person not just a number, we've given them a first name person to reserve one for you ahead of time. Not just call it some impersonal number. Call this person. She's going to help you. So we've got two pieces of that empathy puzzle going on here. We understand that it's not easy to get a computer, and we're going to give you someone who can personally help you with this situation. But what if it is a troll? Well, we've all heard this, right? Don't feed the trolls. And that still stands. The best strategy is to ignore the trolls, because trolls are very much like toddlers. If you have a neurotypical toddler who's, having a tantrum because they're not, you got that stereotypical situation, you got the candy bar, they're not getting it at the checkout line, and you're thinking, oh, if you react to it, they know they can get a rise out of you. So, but here's the piece that people don't often get, and that is you actually should not delete what they post, because deleting what they post may only egg the troll on. Now, there are some exceptions to this, of course, such as if something is obviously racist or using hateful language, that kind of thing, obviously delete it, block it, and report it. That kind of stuff is not okay. But if someone's just doing it to get a rise out of you and they're not using that kind of language or theme, don't respond to it. Don't rise to the bait. And on Facebook in particular, there's a really nice feature that I love where you can hide a post. It's not deleted, and the only you as the administrator and the troll can see the post, so the troll doesn't know it's been hidden from everyone else. But if you delete it, they're going to know it. I wish that all of the channels had the hide feature on Facebook, because that really is nice for dealing with those trolls that do occasionally come up. Okay. Let's talk about pulling the plug. This is not something that gets addressed very often, and because we often think that if we have a channel, we have to do stuff with that channel forever. If we have a Snapchat account and we just can't get it to work, what now? Do we keep it forever? What do we do? Can we get rid of it? And the answer, of course, like most things in life, is it depends, right? We always love that answer. Okay. I was checking the question box, but I think Jamie's keeping me pretty well up to date. I think before we can even talk about pulling the plug on a particular channel or not, we have to answer this question. Do you expect to fail? When it comes to social media, you actually have to expect this. And even big companies that have had major social media setbacks know this. not everything you do is going to work out. Not every channel your library takes on is going to work for your library. Now, when one approach doesn't work, successful organizations try another approach. And eventually, hopefully, they find one that works for them. But one of the problems that we encounter, I think, is sometimes with administrators who may have given you, this edict, okay, go get on Instagram, maybe not really knowing what's involved, or if you even had the demographics to support that as a channel, and they may just expect you to make it go. And I think that that's a mistake. We need to tell our directors, our managers, just like this is another Jay Bauer quote, we need to tell them at the onset that we're likely to fail before you succeed, or even if you succeed. That's not in there, but I'm going to add it, because you run the risk of giving them a handy excuse to pull the plug and say, we tried that once, it didn't work. Social media, as you already know, is a lot of work, and it's a lot of trying things and failing. And that is part of the process. And it's important that you make sure that your administrators know that up front. If you're the social media manager and you're told, okay, let's get on Snapchat, well, you may not have the demographics to support Snapchat or any other particular channel. You need to know, hey, we're going to get on that. And even if you do have the demographics, it still may not take off. Expect to fail. Not every strategy works. It doesn't mean necessarily you're going to get rid of the channel, though. Part of this, however, of course, we have to back up a little, because you have to know if you're actually failing. Remember, if you may already have a lot of resources invested in Snapchat or Instagram or Pinterest or whatever, and so you have to make doubly sure that it is a failure before you decide to ditch it. You can't let subjective or emotional responses factor into this decision making. And you may also have built up some good social capital on that channel, on that particular platform, that may be difficult to recover at a later time. So let's look at a checklist. How do you know? First, were there goals ever set? I don't know how many of you actually have written goals for your social media. If I had to hazard a guess, I'd say less than 50%, just based on averages. A lot of libraries do not have any kind of written strategy or goals for their social media. And the problem with this, of course, is how do you know if you're failing if you never had goals you were supposed to meet, if you never knew where the end of the finish line was? And if you did have goals, were they realistic? If you were going to say, okay, we've got to have 1,000 followers in 3 months on Twitter, that's probably not realistic. It's not going to pan out for you. Was it planned well? Did you use an editorial calendar? Was it actually followed? And was this channel the right channel to begin with? Was the content that was posted to that platform just a bunch of promotions? Were the right people involved? There's a lot of planning. And lastly, did it have buy-in? And what I mean by this is, was enough staff time allotted by managers? I know I saw at least one comment earlier, and I bet this applies to many of you, that we kind of do social media when we have time. And that's not a realistic expectation. Social media is a commitment. It's not just something you can do when you have time, and that's part of the reason you need that editorial calendar. But did you have enough time given to you by your managers? Did people not deliver content that they were supposed to deliver to you? If people are not giving you the content they're supposed to, obviously they haven't bought in to doing the work. If you have to pull the plug, let's say you looked at all those factors on the failure checklist and said, yep, yeah, this wasn't a good thing, and we've tried everything, and we don't have any of this, or we fixed all these problems, and it's still just we're not getting much in the way of anything out of this particular platform. Well, if you have to pull the plug, you don't abandon the account. It can be very tempting to just say, okay, done, leave it be. Redirect people to the channels that you are using. So the last post on Instagram, if you're getting rid of Instagram, for example, might be, you know what, we're done with Instagram, but you can find us here, here, and here. And be honest. Say, this really didn't work out for us. Not as many people as we thought were engaging with us. That kind of thing. And it doesn't have to be Instagram. It could be Snapchat. It could be, Snapchat will be a little harder. But I think you get the idea. Don't just abandon it and say, all done. You don't want to abandon the account. And you certainly don't want to delete or the account. You can deactivate it as long as you can potentially reactivate it at a later time. Of course, it depends on the channel that you're working with. Not every channel has that feature. A lot do. But one of the most important reasons not to delete the account entirely is not just because you might want it later, but also because of brand jacking. For those of you who are not familiar with brand jacking, it's not. I've only seen it happen once in a library. It was with a website, and I hope I never see it with a social media channel. But it does happen, particularly out sort of in the rest of the world. The idea being is that if you abandon an account and you delete it entirely, someone else can take that name, and then theoretically they could be XYZ library and put out whatever they wanted. You still want to control the name. You still want to control your brand. I saw this happen actually with a teen website years ago. The library bought a domain name, some specialized domain name for their teen website, and then they decided to abandon the website, and then they stopped paying for the domain name, and that domain name was bought up by someone, and it was now a porn site. Not a good plan, especially when you consider how cheap domain names are. They should have kept the domain name and redirected it to their regular website. That's a form of brand jacking. Also, a lot of large companies, Microsoft most notably, buy their domain name, just as sort of a fun fact, plus the word sucks. So like Microsoft Sucks, the last time I checked, was actually owned by Microsoft. And a lot of companies do this to protect their brand name. So that's just, again, another form of preventing brand jacking. So what are the big takeaways today? Because obviously we've kind of just touched on the tip of some of these things, but hopefully you can take these back and clean up your act a little bit. First, it is going to be okay. Those of us who spend a lot of time getting our hands dirty in the stream of social media, we know it's going to be okay. It's okay to admit that you're overwhelmed and that you're sick to death of social media. I will lead the line on that one. I've now written 3 books about it, and I'm sick to death of it, and if I never saw it again, I would initially probably go into withdrawal, and I'd get over it, and I'd probably be a happier person. So we're going to be okay. But the most important takeaways, I think, on a more practical level are these. First, if you have an editorial calendar, or if you don't have an editorial calendar, obviously you need to get one. But if you have one, make sure you're following those 2 rules. Just one calendar for everything and everyone, get that bird's eye view, and make sure that you're including social sharing on it as well. In your responses to everybody except the trolls, no matter how obnoxious they are, as long as they're not actually a troll, make sure you use that empathy factor. That's going to save you a lot of headaches down the road. And lastly, you know, when it comes to pulling the plug, no decisions by anecdote. I didn't use that phrase exactly, but I want you to remember that checklist a few slides back. You know, don't just say, well, I don't think it worked. You need to know why it didn't work, because you don't want this to be repeated again later when a new service comes along and you jump onto that. You want to make sure that it's not going to end up as another thing we just didn't manage to do right. Make sure you're planful about it and you've got the buy-in. If you're curious about even more of this stuff and why I have this love-hate relationship with social media, I have a few books on the subject, including a new one this year, which is The Librarian's Nitty-Gritty Guide to Content Marketing, all available through ALA and Amazon and other places. If you have specific questions that I didn't get to in the midst of the webinar, I'm happy to get to those. Or if you'd like to contact me individually, you can see I've got an email address, I've got a Twitter handle. I also have a website called memelaura.com. And Jamie, I don't know if there were questions that I didn't get to.
I'm not seeing anything right now, but again, we do have a few minutes, so if you do have a question for Laura, feel free to type it into the question area and we can get to that. Laura, I wanted to ask, so I know way back when social media was big, you know, I think a lot of presenters were, you know, when we had presentations on social media, a lot of people were saying, well, you don't want to go on every platform and you want to do what's right. You want to do the platforms that's right for your library and your community. So is that still the same, or should we really just be using what we have the time for and what we think works for our community, or has that changed at all?
No, it hasn't changed at all, and I still see too many libraries jumping on things without a good business case for doing so. You do have to use what's right for your community. I was perhaps most famously schooled when I made a comment to a bunch of California librarians a couple years back about MySpace, being completely dead, and I was immediately corrected. No. In California, among Latino teens, that is not the case. Now, it may have changed since that couple of years,
sure.
But MySpace has theoretically been dead for a long time for most of us. They knew what their community was using, and that was a complete shock to me. Not that they knew what their community was using, but it was something I would never have imagined. It's important to know who you're actually talking to where.
That makes sense. Sandy is just wondering if you can go a slide back to your book titles again, so she can
sure.
see those.
Hang on a second.
Okay, there they are. Anne says, a content planning calendar. Why didn't I find this tool sooner? Thank you. So I imagine you have found that to be helpful in your use of social media. Right.
I am very much of that same opinion. Why didn't I know about this sooner? Because I used to just dread every day, like, oh, I've got to post something on Facebook for Oakland. And there's still days when I kind of do things spontaneously, of course, because things come up that are timely. But for the most part, I love having that fallback of knowing if something magical doesn't appear, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you see happening with Facebook is still like the number one tool that we're seeing and using. Where do you see that going in the next couple of years? Do you still see us using it as much? Yes.
Well, Facebook, it's pretty clear about where it's going, and it's already strongly heading in that direction, and that's two things in particular. If your library doesn't already have a budget for Facebook, get one, because it's pretty much pay to play. Yes, there are exceptions and people who magically have organic reach on some of their stuff, but for the vast majority of us, it's pay to play. And it doesn't require a lot of money. We spend $5 a week.
Right.
I mean, which is nothing, Really, any library can afford to do it. And, of course, more money is better. It would be nice if I had more money, but I don't. But if I had no money, nothing would ever get seen at all.
Okay. So if your library currently has a marketing budget and you are using some of that for flyers and posters and printers and maybe some of that for other tools to have premium accounts, you would suggest allocating some of that money toward ads on Facebook.
Yes, that would be number one. The other thing is that Mark Zuckerberg it was either late last year or early this year, has publicly said that he pretty much envisions Facebook as almost a video-only platform.
Really?
Notice that if you look through your feed now, you've got auto-playing video, and it tends to rank much higher. They're actually actively aiming for that, and the advent of Facebook Live is just one part of that master plan. So if your library isn't doing video, you're going to get left behind probably in the next year or two, which is sad but true.
So doing the live video or just video in general?
Video in general.
Okay. Yeah, and I know that's something I've talked about and have pushed before too in some of the presentations I've done. I have noticed too, a lot of it is very much about what's trending and celebrity focused, and I think unfortunately we're gonna see a trend toward that also.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, social media. Libraries, I think, in some extent are still going, oh, why aren't they being nice anymore? It's kind of like drugs. They got us all hooked, and now we have to start paying for it.
I know. That's so true. Well, we are out of time. So I want to thank all of you in the audience who participated today, who participated in the chat and provided comments for everyone to see. And again, I want to thank Laura for an excellent presentation. The recording of this will be posted later today or for sure by tomorrow in the recordings area of our website, which I did post earlier in the presentation. Again, our next webinar on user experience is coming up on November 3rd. You can register for that already on our website. So that is all I have for now. And again, thank you, Laura. I hope all of you have a great rest of your day, and a great week. So long.